Welcome to the podcast summary of Strip Jadun. Today's catch-up is all about Strip, the Christina Aguilera album that tried to blow up her teen pop image and rebuild it from scratch. It's a record full of contradictions on purpose, messy and ambitious, sexual and self-protective, critically bruised at first, but commercially durable enough to become one of the defining pop reinventions of its era. And a lot of what felt chaotic at the time now reads like the whole point. Strip started as a deliberate exit from the version of Aguilera that had been packaged for her on her debut. She ended her relationship with manager Steve Kurtz and took much more control over the music, the lyrics, the image, and the whole Tina persona that came with this era. She also turned down a reported $5 million advance from RCA that would have pushed her to finish faster, which is a pretty strong way of saying, no, I'm not doing this on somebody else's timetable. So the session stretched from 2001 into 2002 while she was working through real personal upheaval, including her first breakup and songs shaped by an abusive childhood. The title Stripped really matters here, because it wasn't mainly about skin. It was about emotional exposure, about letting the lyrics and even the imperfections carry more weight than the big technical singing she was already famous for. Musically, she went wide. Very wide. Strip moves through pop, R&B, soul, hip-hop, rock, gospel, Latin music, flamenco, jazz, funk, and even drum and bass, because Aguilera said she wanted to show the different colors and textures she was into. You can hear that in the production team too. Scott Storch, Linda Perry, Alicia Keys, and Glenn Ballard all help build very different sonic rooms for her to walk into. That's how you get the hard, almost combative rock punch of Fighter, the plain-spoken piano vulnerability of Beautiful, and then a gospel-leaning finish elsewhere on the record. It also became the album's biggest critical problem. A lot of reviewers heard all that variety and called it scattered, overproduced, or lacking focus. The more sympathetic reading was that the sprawl itself proved she was actually steering the thing. It wasn't tidy, but it was personal. One reason Strip still sticks around in conversation is that it refused to choose between sexual expression and feminist self-definition. On one side, you've got songs like Dirrty and Get Mine, Get Yours being openly sexual. On the other, songs like Can't Hold Us Down, Beautiful, Soar, and The Voice Within are arguing for self-respect, agency, and a stronger sense of self. The album's larger argument is pretty clear. A woman claiming sexual agency doesn't cancel out her feminism. Can't Hold Us Down makes that point directly by going after the double standard that praises sexually assertive men and shames women for the same behavior. It was reportedly heard as aimed at Eminem and Fred Durst, which tells you something about the culture she was pushing against. And later reassessments gave the album even more credit because it was taking on casual sex, infidelity, misogyny, domestic violence, bullying, eating disorders, and LGBT identity at a time when mainstream pop empowerment could be a lot safer and a lot thinner. The public story of Strip really turns on the contrast between its first two big singles. Aguilera chose Dirrty as the lead single over Linda Perry's Beautiful because she wanted a provocative comeback statement, something openly down and dirty that announced the break with her old image in all caps. The video absolutely did that. It drew comparisons to Britney Spears' I'm a Slave for You, triggered protests in Thailand, and became a full-on culture war object. Even so, it was still an international hit, just not the kind of runaway US statement people may have expected. After that underperformance and all the controversy, RCA moved quickly with Beautiful, and the tone of the conversation changed almost overnight. Beautiful was universally praised, became a major global success, and its video dealt with anorexia, homosexuality, bullying, self-esteem, and transgender issues. It also received a GLAAD award. So suddenly the same album could be framed as cheap shock tactics or as a serious, emotionally candid work about identity and worth. That split was built into Strip from the start, but those two singles made it impossible to ignore. The first critical reaction was mixed at best. Strip landed a 55 out of 100 on Metacritic, and some reviews were genuinely harsh. Commercially, though, The story was less about a huge opening than about staying power. It debuted at number 2 in the US with 330,000 first-week sales, then kept going until it passed 4.4 million copies in the United States and more than 12 million worldwide. The UK run is especially wild. It entered at number 19, climbed to number 2 later, spent 102 weeks in the top 100, and had sold about 2.05 million copies there by 2021. That delayed growth ended up making it her best-performing album in the country, which is kind of the perfect stripped outcome. It didn't always win the first argument, but it lasted. Over time, the reputation shifted hard. The album picked up 5 Grammy nominations. Beautiful won, and Stripped eventually made it into 1001 albums you must hear before you die. Later critics and listeners started hearing it as a blueprint for a more honest kind of female pop, one willing to be contradictory, imperfect, and a little unruly in public. Stripped still feels like an artist testing how much of herself she could put on the table and how much mess the audience would tolerate if the honesty was real. Turns out, quite a lot. And maybe that's why this album aged better than some of the reviews did. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.